A quick poll to get me an impression. Who is already using Vue.js in this room? All right. Well, okay. Hope you still learn something new. There are also going to be some experiences from our project. And who is actually speaking better English than German in this room? Okay, so at least it was a good thing to give this talk in English, hopefully. You can tell afterwards if it was okay for you. Okay, doors closed now. It's 5 o'clock. Let's start. The last talk separates you from the party. Well, I ask you, well, one thing, you can give comments about this talk in the app. Please do that either in the app or come to me just after the talk. Talk to me to help me improve this talk. Anybody who wants to get a Vue.js sticker for his or her notebook, also come forward at the end of the talk. There are some stickers. Yeah, take them and put them on your notebook. All right. So this is today's talk. Vue.js, why it's, at least as I see it, developer-friendly, fast and versatile. I talk about the expectations you have when choosing a new JavaScript framework. And if they are satisfied, get you started with the basics about Vue.js and then how to structure projects. If it's more than a basic application, what are components, how can you structure things, looking at performance, and then also some lessons learned that we had in our project. Right. Very short commercial break. My sponsor and employer is MSG Systems, is founded in 1980, independent, owned by the founders all over Germany and all over the world. Like 6,000 employees for your projects, and well, we're also looking for people who join us. I'm an IT consultant working at a department called Travel and Logistics, basically a small startup within the big company. I'm originally a Java developer. I did also database stuff, PL SQL. I worked in consumer finance, selling consumer loans to customers. Also built an online banking at some point, so lots of web history. I'm married, 2 kids, and a little hobby looking for geocaches, some little boxes hidden all over the world. Right, so end of the commercial break. Let's go back to the agenda. So expectations. Yeah, just another JavaScript framework. And I think, well, boring is good for your health. When you're choosing a framework, you want to deliver business value for your customer. And, well, JavaScript fatigue. There are too many JavaScript frameworks. You can't do without. You need some JavaScript to deliver a user experience. But the problem is, well, the lifetime of your application is usually longer than the hype cycle of the application or maybe the version of the framework. So yes, well, what to choose? Well, I try to choose something very boring, Vue.js. I want to have something that is easy to learn, even for JavaScript newbies. We set up a project that ran for now about 1.5 years with people who have a Java background, for example, but should also do the front-end stuff that's needed. It should give us the productivity that we need in day-to-day work. And I don't want to have rough corners or a problematic learning curve. I was also looking for stable APIs. So we can do upgrades to new versions without a lot of hassle. Let's see if we manage that. To get started, well, for Vue.js, there's a good online documentation that you can browse. You just need to pick version 1.x, that's now old, or 2.x. So there are 2 kind of online manuals to choose from. And in 2.x, you can just read it. Maybe there's a chapter in there telling the feature is then available from 2.2 or 2.3, but it stays very, very stable. That is also showing that the API and the functionality stays very stable. There's a book. People put it under their pillow and read it. It's a good thing to get started here. And then there's a list, an awesome Vue.js list, telling you, okay, what frameworks, what additions to look out for. That's very, very helpful to get started with Vue.js. The tools. Well, there's a command line tool, Vue CLI, that gives you a starter project with a complete build chain. You can choose if you want to do Webpack or Browserify. You start this Vue CLI and it asks you some questions what to use here. You can also choose if you want to have a full feature project with hot reloading, linting, testing, or maybe a progressive web app all included, or a simple one. And this gets you started in no time. And well, to get really into the development, you need an IDE. We used quite much IntelliJ for that. Well, that's basically the same for PHP Storm and WebStorm. There's a plugin for Vue.js that supports the additional functionality that you have there. And well, the next plugin that you probably need definitely is then the Vue.js developer tools for Chrome, another plugin that allows you to inspect the running application in development mode in the browser. Like on the left, you have the application running. On the right, you have just another tab in your developer tools to see all the components and also see the state of the components. That's about the tools. And if you do have questions, please ask them in between. Then I will have time to answer them. Maybe at the end there might not be time. So please do ask questions. There is already a question? No. You need to shout because the light is shining in my eyes, and shouting helps getting my attention. So the core functionality, the core Vue.js library, it includes all the view binding, the input binding, event binding, we will look into in a second, conditionals that when you do your views, also looping. It contains templates, a concept of components, mix-ins, transitions, lifecycle hooks, computed elements. That's all part of the core of Vue.js. You install one library, Vue.js, and you get all of this into your application. There are additional packages you can add, but they are not like third-party add-ons, but they are add-ons from the core Vue.js project. So by using this, you can add routing. You can add server-side rendering, streaming server-side rendering with client-side hydration, meaning you have a single-page web app that is being pre-rendered on the server side and then sent to the client and then acting like any other single-page app. If you want to, you can use TypeScript, but you don't have to. So it's optional. You can use JavaScript templates instead of the HTML templates, but you don't have to. And you can do Flux React style application with Vuex, but you don't have to. And this is something that carries on quite a lot with Vue.js. You get something to get started with. You can add later on the things that you find out on your way that you need them as well. You add them. Or on the other hand, if you knew before that you want to do a Flux React style application, you add Vuex just from the start. What I will cover today are then these bits and pieces from the core functionality, and also routing, because I think routing, that's something you definitely want to use in a single page app. All the other things that will be, well, things for other talks. There's been a Vue.js conference earlier this year. You will find there a lot of recorded talks, and you might find out more about the other topics in the recorded talks. Right. Basics, how to get started with Vue.js. You need to initialize it. It's a JavaScript library like any other else. And the first thing, you write some HTML, okay? And you then bind it to, you define as part of your web page a DOM element, give it an ID to say, okay, this part of the DOM, Vue.js should handle that one. In this example, this already contains the template. I then include the Vue.js JavaScript library and then a custom script telling him, okay, oh yeah, load Vue.js, fine, and then I need to initialize Vue.js. I need to tell it, okay, which part of the DOM should be handled by Vue.js. And I could also pass something like a data structure in here, telling, for example, a message. And once this all is initialized, it will then display up there where the message is, it will display hello Vue.js. So that's the very, very minimal Vue.js application. Well, let's add some functionality. So if you want to add this input and view binding that I talked before, like we've seen the input the view binding already. So any variable that I have, I can put in double curly brackets and display that in here. So that's a view binding, something that is in my model. I can put that in the view. I can also carry on. I can have an input field. And I want to have this input field, well, display the current context of the message, and I want to also edit it. That's now an input binding. And when I have a button, it's a very good example for an event binding. When I click on this button, I want to have a JavaScript function to be called. And the JavaScript function we see on the right. So what it will do, it will reverse the message field, and that's exactly what it's doing. It's chopping down the message to single characters, reverses them, and joins them together. Okay. Let's see how this actually looks in real life. I have a browser somewhere. Right. So yeah, now I can type here. I have all the binding. Once the input field sees that the value changes, this is then propagated to the data model. And as the data model changes, and then the view binding for the thing at the very top, I could probably increase it a bit. Yeah, the other one changes as well. Yeah. And I can also have conditionals in here on single HTML tags saying this should only be visible as long as the message should only show if the message is empty. So again, this works as well. I remove everything from here, saying, okay, please enter a message. Now this is being displayed. I add hello. I click on the button. This is reversed. So everything works together. Input binding, view binding, event binding, and conditionals. Right. And this is all you need to get rid of, well, I think lots of jQuery. And giving you a first way of getting an interactive application that works as expected when doing like view binding, event binding. Right. And for some people, that might be just enough. You have one component, one part of the application. You want to do some, well, some functionality in an app, maybe show a basket in your online shop or anything else. Maybe that's just enough for you. But as we've also did, we built a bigger application, and then you need to find out how to structure that, how to build a bigger project, how to structure that down into components, and give it a bit more structure. Let's do that. So a standard structure, you can get that out of the box. You can use this npm install Vue CLI. So this gives you the command line tool to create a simple application with all the build chain that you need. And then you say Vue init. And then you say browserify or not, or webpack, and all the fancy stuff or not. And it gives you a layout, a directory structure. Say, okay, you have a folder for assets, you have a folder for components, and you have a pre-configured router in there, and well, some main classes to start with, like a main component, a main.js, that is being called when the application is being when the application is being initialized, and the frame index HTML. So that's everything that comes out of a Vue init. And then you say, okay, npm install. Let's download all the node packages needed for that, and say npm run dev. And this gives you a full live application that you with hot reloading, if you have chosen that when doing the Vue init. Right. In this Vue.js, I think I haven't at least seen before. I haven't seen that similar thing with other frameworks before. Vue.js has single file components. The idea being, whenever I want to display something, I need to have a template, some JavaScript, and CSS. And Vue.js goes a bit further, says, well, why don't we put all these things in one file, in a single file component, saying, okay, and then I can open them up in the IDE, all at the same time. I can navigate between these and edit them together and commit them together. And this works quite well. We will see also in a minute when we look into IntelliJ, when you have a Vue.js plugin installed, your IDE helps you to navigate through these parts, also does the proper syntax highlighting for Vue.js. Right. Yeah, maybe it's a good time to actually look at this now. So this is the sample project. I also already ran a node install and have a big folder with all the node modules. You probably know that from other things already. And I can now have a component like this. This does not have any CSS. Other components do have CSS. This CSS is already sorry. This CSS is scoped, so this CSS will only be shown when this component is being loaded, and it will affect only this one component. All right. Sorry. Leftovers were cold. Sorry for that. So now I have all these components, and this is the time to add a router. So break down your application into several components, and saying whenever I navigate to one or the other component, I add a router. And what I do for this, I add a router view to the top level component that's being added to my browser. And I define, okay, the different URLs I have here, like the root URL should go to a component hello, and the other paths should go to another component. Yeah. And this then gives me an application like this. Okay, scroll it down a bit. Being like the main application being this, and also I can now navigate to the counter, to the parent and slots example that I have brought here today. I also see all these components I have here, like the router links that are being rendered here. They are all visible as components in the Vue developer tools. I can probably, no, I can zoom in here as well. This will give me all the details about these different links. So this one is, yeah, what's actually doing here. I can also look into hello. I see the message in here that's being displayed here. Once I start typing here, it all updates as one would expect. And the other thing is, like you would expect from a hot reload thing, I could probably go to the main component and try changing something here. For example, I comment in some new code. For example, a transition that we will see in a minute. And once I edit this transition, yeah, I change to the same browser and have also transitions in here. Wow. Okay. And as I said, transitions are also part of the core Vue.js thing. No additional library needed. But your browser needs to support CSS transitions here. Some browsers might not do that yet. Yeah, and this is a transition example. Yeah, it's transition saying, okay, you can use it for the router. You can also use it for any other component in your template. When something goes out and in, you can, yeah, have different CSS transitions that support you doing a fancy app. Right. And this is a recorded thing, just in case it might have not worked, but you've seen it just a second ago. Well, for a lot of applications, you can stop here again and say, okay, I have my single page application, I have components, one component for each view, and each root in my application. Let's stop here and not make it more complex. You can do that. But if you have an application that requires you to have very complex views, you might want to break them down again. Like, have a parent-child relationship for components within one root. You can use the child components as HTML tags, and you just aggregate them if they don't interact with each other. But the parent and the child, they can interact if you want to do that. So the parent can pass on data to the child called props, and the parent can listen to custom events that are then created by the child. This gives you functionality to structure your application even further. So what I created here, I hope it's a good example here. I created a template for a custom button. So I can tell the button what text to show on the button, and whenever the button is being clicked, the parent component should be notified. So it listens for a custom event that is then connected to a JavaScript method again in the parent component. So what I do here, I import a child component from a JavaScript module, and pass on the name of the button that's being clicked here, and bind the event of the child to a JavaScript method in my parent component. And in the child, I define the props that are allowed to be passed on to the child. And whenever this child also has an HTML template that I excluded here for brevity, and whenever this button is being clicked, just another event binding, it bubbles up an event called click button, and this click button event is then captured by the parent and redirected to a JavaScript method in the parent that then increments a counter. Again, functionality that helps you to structure your applications. Let's find out how this looks in real life. So I have here this parent-child relationship. Again, this is a hierarchy, so I can filter and can drop down to the components here. The parent has a counter that's also being displayed here. The click button has the label, but that's actually being passed on from the parent. Once I click in the client component on this button, the counter in the parent is being incremented because this event, like I would say, bubbles up. The developer tools also help me to find out what events are being fired and who's actually using them. In this case, all these click events, these custom events that I created are shown in the developer tools. You can see also that I can add a payload to them and also do a lot of more things with this kinds of events. Right. Again, for a lot of applications, this can be enough. You don't need any more things, but in our project, we said, okay, we want to have a reusable component, for example, for a very, very custom table. And it's okay to maybe pass on some texts, like we did for the button. But in some places, it might be very useful to pass on or override parts of the template that you have in the child component, that you can override that as well. And this is also part of the core library of Vue.js, that the parent can pass on slots that can override the predefined parts in the child. And the child can also, there's a typo in here, sorry. The child defines some properties that can also be, the data that's being displayed in these slots can also be dynamic and like pre-computed from the child. So what we can do here, we have a component called for definition lists. We can pass on a term and a description from the parent component, but we can also pass on a template for the special slot term and add a prefix for that. We use it in a table context, so this allowed us in a table context to pass onto the table for specific columns, specific formattings. If you want to have this column to be aligned to the right, aligned to the left, if you wanted to have a special number formatting or an input field, we did something like this using these slots that we passed on from the parent to then this child component being a table in the other case. Well, but on the other hand, well, a parent can only override the slots that are predefined in the child, and the child can have a default template that is used as long as the parent doesn't override this template. So usually the child would just render the term, and in this case I override it to add a prefix t colon and then render the text afterwards. Again. And well, all these concepts got us quite far in our project, and we gradually introduced them to the team. We developed several applications in a microservice context, and it allowed us to define a structured application with reusable components, and this was also quite maintainable for people to also look at other people's code and to read it, to find their way around with all the components. Having them all in one file helped a lot, and also having the Vue developer tools in Chrome to look into all the different states and components here. Right. That's probably most things you need to know about Vue.js to even write a bigger application. Let's look briefly at performance from different angles. Performance during development. Let's start with that one. Learnability was quite good. There are online resources, there are very few and simple concepts to learn. How to actually operate with Vue.js. As I said, it was also easy to read other people's code. And having this hot reload in development mode, it was very fast round-trip development to get your front-end up and running. Performance in production. Well, it's also first thing about stumbling blocks. You write something and then it doesn't work out as expected. One thing to look out for is if you add new properties to your data model that's behind your view, while the model is already bound to the view, you should use Vue.set, but that's also outlined in the manuals in several places. But just remember that if a property doesn't pop up in the view if you edit it afterwards while the view has already been displayed. That's something to watch out for. But on the other, well, there were no other stumbling blocks that occurred for our developers. Finally, the one thing you probably all thought first when you heard performance here, load times. Vue.js is quite small. It's 20K minified in gzipped. It doesn't have any other dependencies. All the templates that we see in here, saying basically HTML and all these curly brackets in there, they're being pre-compiled. If you use this Vue CLI starter thing, they will be pre-compiled and the browser will never see the original templates anyway. We found that Vue.js is quite fast. In one part of the application, there was a planning view, basically all month and lots of resources that need to be planned over a month. We used a table for that. This is usually not great when it comes to performance, but with Vue.js it acted very, very well. With very good render performance, adding rows, changing cells, and binding all the values to that. That worked very, very nicely. And we didn't need to do performance optimization here, and I was surprised and relieved when it all worked very well in this part. There was performance benchmarks. Stefan Krause did some. I put the link in the URL at the bottom. I will share the slides afterwards so you can do some, look at some other slides about real performance tests. Right. Lessons learned. Looking back, at least for our case, Vue.js met our expectations. Boring, and let's focus on the things we want to implement. On the other hand, I see it's very fast in rendering. I see that you can also do transitions. We didn't rely on that very much in our application, but We got our newbies started quite easily, even if they were Java developers. We delivered a complex UI with a runtime performance and a maintainable structure. And the single file components again, sorry for saying it again and again, it helped a lot. We developed our own shared components for navigation parts and tables and reused them in several places. Again, using parent-child relationships and also the slots I talked about earlier. We also went through the update cycle from Vue.js 1 to Vue.js 2. The good thing is Vue.js changed, looking at the API, only minimal between these two releases. There was, when you looked at the concepts, you were able to sometimes implement how Vue.js 2.x will work, like these patterns already in Vue.js 1.x, so you didn't have a lot of trouble when then actually updating the library. There was a migration helper script that highlighted all the things that will no longer work with Vue.js 2. And that was very, very nice and well prepared from the Vue.js team. They did a very good job on this one. Anyone who's still on Vue.js 1, I would recommend going to Vue.js 2. One thing would be you would have faster rendering with Vue.js 2, with the virtual DOM. But again, looking at the developer experience here, you will have very good warning messages and improved warning messages in development mode with Vue.js 2, and also the error handling improved quite a lot. Sometimes you might have experienced with another framework or with earlier versions of Vue when there was a JavaScript error in your component and the app would just not start a single page app. It would just break down. This is no longer the case with Vue.js 2.2, I think. That's when they started to improve it quite a lot. It will then log exactly the component that is currently failing, will render everything else except that one component that just broke down, and the error messages are very, very helpful. And I asked all my developers around, well, how was this Vue.js update to 2 that we did? And they said it was okay, and well, we had more trouble updating to the latest Webpack version, Webpack. So that was giving us more trouble if you have something you want to compare it with. Right. Okay. These are the links. This is my Twitter handle. I think if the slides have already been posted, please get back to me with questions, and well, thanks for joining. So questions from the room.
There are so many people. I think there are a lot of questions, aren't there? No? Really? Okay. Yeah, I have one or two questions. There's what about state handling? Like, I don't know. Of course, I compare it to React, so right. I use Redux, or we heard a talk about Reflux today. Mm-hmm. How do you do it? I think you don't use the double data binding or...
Yeah, well, you can start out with a state being handled by a single component that loads it from database and then passes it on maybe on the client, on the child components. In some places, we used a global data model for the single page app. That was then read-write for multiple components. That might not be good style for big applications, but it worked for our very, very sliced applications. But if you want to do a bigger application, that is then I would say probably Vuex would be the thing to use. Vuex is also integrated in the developer tools. I don't have a Vuex application with me, but you can also roll back in the different states because they're read-only. So you can, and undo debugging in the web browser. That's quite cool, I think. But okay, so depends on the size of the application.
So, but it's more like you are doing it by your own. So there is nothing like Redux or something who's giving you more like a structure how to do it.
Okay, if you would use Vuex, it would be the structured way given to me. Okay. But in our applications, we currently don't use Vuex and do it ourselves.
Okay. And also, how do you compare it? Like, is it more like a library like React, or it's a framework like Angular? What would you say? Because at the beginning you showed there are plugins you can use, you don't have to. And Angular there's everything baked in. How's it with Vue?
I don't have an opinion on this one. Okay. I know people call it a library only, but in the end, it doesn't matter. It has a good developer experience from my point of view, and we also at some points combine it with other libraries that I thought, oh, this might not work, but yeah, it worked quite well.
Yeah. So, are there still no questions from the audience? Yeah.
I think there are no dependencies to the DOM in Vue anymore. Have you ever tried to use it with native script or anything similar?
No, I haven't. All right.
No.
Oh, pity.
Yeah, there would another question of me as well. If there is something, because Angular has native script, React has React Native, and if there is something in Vue.
Yeah, there's weeks. You can native script is to do a native app on a yeah. Right. There's Weeks, another library, another project that you can do mobile apps using Vue.js. It is Alibaba pushing that one forward, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and you can probably the other projects are a bit ahead, but they're doing very, very well to catch up.
Okay. So I just have one question left: is where does Vue come from? So because I have more or less first touch point I have with Vue. I never tried it yet, and for me it was just there.
All right. Yeah.
I mean, excuse me. The question is also who is developing it, and yeah.
Okay. There's Evan Vue, basically the one who wrote. I think he was involved with Meteor before that, and maybe some other frameworks as well. And he is the one who, well, invented it, put it this way, but there are now, and it's being funded now as a fundraising campaign, and with people contributing and companies contributing monthly payments, and I think he and probably one or two other people are now funded 100% by this crowdfunding thing every month. And well, it's not bound to any company. It's not bound to Google. It's not bound to Facebook. And it's used quite a lot, in the Chinese, at the other side of the globe, basically, around China. And Alibaba is a big contributor there, and you find a lot of, Asian-sounding names in the commuters there. But the documentation is all in English. There's a Chinese translation, if that's helpful for somebody in the room, but not for me. But the English translation is good.
Okay. Cool. If there's no question left, then let's give another
Alex. Yeah.
Big applause. Yeah. Thank you.